it was that commitment, that humanitarian commitment, that led the Democratic Labour Party to fight for independence in 1966. Because you do not understand Barbadian political history if you do not understand that there were people in Barbados in 1966 who did not believe that they needed independence because the colonial system had worked so well for them. They had become so wealthy under the colonial system that they could not understand why you needed to change those arrangements, because the arrangements had worked satisfactorily for them. The Democratic Labour Party took the view, the correct view, that those colonial arrangements were not working for the masses of the people, and that this country needed independence so that enlightened men put in positions of power could make enlightened decisions for the betterment of ordinary men and women in this society. And that's why we carry this country into independence against the resistance of the Barbados Labour Party and against the resistance too of that same Barbados Shipping and Trading Company Limited, the twin brother, as it were, of the Barbados Labour Party, and who had always heard Arabara say, financed the Barbados Labour Party right through 1966 to oppose independence for Barbados. It was the humanitarian concerns of the Democratic Labour Party that led it to introduce in Barbados in 1975 a succession act that abolished the distinction between legitimate and illegitimate children. Before the passage of the succession act, a child who was born outside of wedlock could not inherit the property of his father if that father died. Only the child born within the marriage. The Democratic Labour Party thought that that distinction between legitimate children and illegitimate children was an iniquitous distinction. It was a sinful and antisocial distinction, and we passed the Succession Act to effect equality between children born in wedlock and children born outside of wedlock, so that they can enjoy the same rights under the law. That is what we call a humanitarian concern. It was the Democratic Labour Party that passed the Severance Payment Act. The first Severance Payment Act ever passed in Barbados, and its purpose was to ensure that workers who lost their jobs through no fault of their own, but had contributed to the build-up of their employers' businesses, would not have to leave work and go home empty-pocketed, would not have to leave and go home penniless. They were supposed to be compensated for every year that they spent with their employer building up his business. We take these things for granted now, but there was a time in Barbados when these things did not exist. These pieces of progressive social legislation did not exist, and the society was a completely different society from the one we know today. It was the Democratic Labour Party that made it possible for the first time in Barbados' history for women to get maternity leave with pay. Before the Democratic Labour Party, if a woman became pregnant, she either had to remain at work until the day or a day or two before she was to have her baby, or if she went on maternity leave, she could get no pay. We thought that that was an iniquitous situation, and we corrected that by passing legislation to ensure that women could get maternity leave with pay. The Social Security system of Barbados, the National Insurance Scheme, was introduced by the Democratic Labour Party in 1967 to ensure that provision could be made for workers during their early yearning years for the time when they would come to their yearning years, when they would come to their retirement. And if they suffered injury on the job, they could also receive compensation to tide them over their difficulties and their families' difficulties. That is the progressive, forward-looking party the Democratic Labour Party has been ever since it assumed government in December 1961. And even after 1986, when we came back to power, as evidence of our humanitarian concern, it was the Democratic Labour Party that passed the Domestic Violence Protection Order Act to make it possible for women to go to court in the event that they were being abused by their spouses and to get a hearing from the court within 3 days. And that act gives the magistrate wide and sweeping powers to bring those domestic situations under control so that the children of Barbados will not have to function in an environment of continued domestic tension and domestic hostility. How can anyone say, in the light of their record of that time, that there is no distinction between the Democratic Labour Party and the Barbados Labour Party? And this Democratic Labour Party in the year 2008, as evidence of its continued commitment to building a society in Barbados, has committed itself to target single women in this society whose children are maintained through the magistrate's courts. Now, ever since the Barbados Labour Party came to office, single women from St. Philip and from St. John have to pay sometimes 3 bus fares going and 3 bus fares coming to go to St. Matthias Court to see if a delinquent father has put any maintenance in the court for the child. And invariably, for some parents, when they get there, they have to leave with long faces because the clerk of the court has unfortunately to report that the man has brought no money. Or in some cases, the father may have had an attachment order made against him by the magistrate where the maintenance is being taken out of his wages at source. But sometimes there is a time lag between the time of deduction of the wages and the time it gets to the court. And that leads to untold frustration by our women, our mothers, who have to go to courts across Barbados to hear these sad stories. We have decided that if the Barbados Labour Party could raise upwards of $11.91 billion over the last 13 years in projects that have benefited the people of Barbados, not at all, that it cannot be too much to make an annual allocation to every magistrate's court in Barbados of no less than $25,000 so that any mother who catches a bus and leaves home to go to check for maintenance for her child, whether the father has put maintenance there or not, the court will be able to give her something to take back home to look after her child until money is put there. That is where we are going. That is a revolutionary piece of social policy. The Barbados Labour Party has reduced Barbados again to an economy rather than keep it and develop it as a society.